What's happening, folks? Geologist Philip Prince. Going to do a Nolichucky video today. A lot of folks had asked for this one. A lot of folks had asked for videos about places that are in the Nolichucky River system, but aren't necessarily obviously related to it because they're quite a good distance away from Erwin, Tennessee, where the Nolichucky sort of spills out of the mountains. And going to try to lay all that out today. It's actually very in good times interesting. In this case, it's almost sort of frightening to look at the areas that the Nolichucky drains and just how much water it focused on Erwin, Tennessee. And one place that drains to the Nolichucky that may not be immediately obvious is what you see here, just kind of down and left to center of the screen. That's Mount Mitchell. There at sort of the summit of the Black Mountains. And if we bring in the colored elevation map here, that Black Mountain Ridge, basically all of it there is up above 6,000 feet. When the rain falls on that, if it goes west, it goes to the Cane River. If it goes east, it goes to the South Toe River. And all of that goes into the Nolichucky. You can come all the way up here past Minneapolis community, all the way up here to Cranberry Gap when the rain falls up here. When the rain falls on Roan Mountain, all of that is going out of the Nolichucky system. So it's a massively sprawling river network. And just to start out here, and we'll draw out what it would look like on this map. It's really impressive, and it's not something even as a geologist who has worked in this area for years and years I'd really thought that much about, and I don't know why that is the case, but certainly the magnitude of flooding that occurred in both the Toe and the Cane, the little streams feeding the Toe and the Cane, and then the Nolichucky that's formed when those rivers come together. It's absolutely staggering. And when you look at the way the landscape is laid out, and when you look at the way this river system is laid out, it starts to make a little bit more sense. Okay, so there's the South Toe. I'm going to do the Cane here, passing the Pensacola area here. This is just west of Burnsville proper. So we got the Cane coming out this direction. Cane meets the Toe there. Um, Tributary, I don't know the name of this stream on the north side of Roan Mountain. We'll add in another one there. Okay, now we'll add a few place names in here. Start with Irwin, which is out here sort of where the Nolichucky actually ends up coming out of the mountains. Okay. So there's Irwin. We'll put Spruce Pine in here. And when I do these place names, I assure you, I'm not trying to exclude or overlook anything. We're just trying to use what we can for a frame of reference here, just so you can get a sense of how big the area that this river drains actually is. I'm going to put Relief, North Carolina in here. Okay. Poplar right here at sort of the head of the Nolichucky Gorge. And then we'll also put sort of the Pensacola area here. Didn't do a very good job with that mark there. Okay. Right. So huge, massive area. And if we fade our overlays away there so that the river network sort of stands out a little better, it's big. Okay. And once the Nolichucky gets out there into the limestone and dolomite valleys of Tennessee, sort of the Great Valley of the Appalachians, 81 runs down it. The character of the river changes, still flooded massively. All of that water is still going, but it's out of the extremely rugged topography that you deal with here in the Blue Ridge of North Carolina. So it's an absolutely enormous river system to begin with. I can't quote you the drainage area there, but it's quite substantial. And the fact that it sort of spans like the trend of the Appalachians, the headwaters go so far in different directions, they're pulling rainwater or pulling runoff from an absolutely enormous area. And when you combine that with the amount of rainfall that we got from the days leading up to Helene and then Helene itself, funnel all that down into a tight gorge, and even tight gorges in the case of the smaller streams. And of course, when the Cane and Toe meet to make the Nolichucky itself, at that point, I mean, it was an absolute monster. The fact that there is so much white elevation color on this map, that's sort of part of the whole problem here, because those high elevations are what we're sapping the maximum rainfall out of the weather system. And this is something that I've talked about in other videos I've done. It's the concept of orographic lifting, meaning that when air is pushed up against the Blue Ridge, the air masses are forced to rise because of the topography. They go up to lower pressure and expand. That causes cooling. The cooling causes condensation, and that amplifies rainfall. And there's really no better example of that than what would have happened here, as air was forced up from essentially Piedmont elevations up over the Black Mountains. Got Mount Mitchell area up here, which is 6,684 feet above sea level. Down here at Old Fort, something like 1,400 feet above sea level. So there's literally one mile, about 1,600 meters of topographic relief between those two locations. That's spread over miles of the landscape, but that's big. And when you take air and push it across that, when it's very moisture laden, Helene in the days prior were bringing moisture from the Gulf of Mexico, bringing it up out of the south up these slopes. You're going to have absolutely catastrophic rainfall. And when you collect that from all of these high peaks that are drained by the Nolichucky system, that's where you really start to run into problems, right? So as we spin the view back around and look out in the direction of flow, uh, you can sort of see the entirety of it here. The Cranberry Gap up there, the Blue Ridge Parkway up here at the head of the at the South Toe, headwaters of the Cane here up on sort of the Black Mountain Ridge. And as we make our way down across this landscape, you can see that it remains really rugged the entire time. And it's actually worth noting along the way here, just in terms of understanding what this flood did along the way, on the way to Irwin. You have to look at this landscape. It's exceptionally rough and rugged. The river itself, we're looking at the Cane here. It is very much kind of incised into the landscape. The topography around it's exceptionally rough, and for that reason, you typically have to run a highway or a road along a river or a stream here. With flooding of this magnitude, you're going to destroy that road network, and it's going to become very, very difficult to move around. If you look at the ruggedness of the background topography here, that's going to be very challenging to do any sort of infrastructural work in. And if we spin the view and look out over this entire area, it looks like that for a considerable distance. Everything you see here is draining to the Nolichucky, and everything you see here saw significant consequences from the overall Helene event. And wanted to talk about just the nature of this landscape. That's been a theme of what I've talked about in these videos. What does this look like in practice? What is it like to live on it, build on it? What do you expect from an event like this? And to do that, I'm going to do a diagram here. We're going to hop out to paint like we've been doing, and try to sketch out what would happen to your road network in a place like this, in an event like this, but also what you might expect from some of these more rugged peaks surrounding the river systems here. We're looking out over the toe at this point, but there's actually some buildable flatter land sort of at the foot of some of these higher peaks here. And unfortunately, in a situation like this, it was equally exposed to geologic hazard from the extreme rainfall, right? So I'm going to diagram this out, kind of keep this landscape in mind, and then we'll come back to these maps and keep going down to Irwin. So hang on just a minute. Okay, so I want to try to capture just some of the basic details of Blue Ridge landscape in the area that we've been talking about here. It is definitely its own type of landscape, and it's one that's distinct within the Appalachians. That distinction definitely contributed to the severity of Helene's impacts in this area. And a lot of them, really ultimately go back to the nature of the landscape, sort of what we've been talking about in all of these videos. And what I'm going to try to draft out here is just sort of kind of a basic overview of the topography. And this part of the Blue Ridge tends to have these, kind of high ranges, like the Roan Mountains or the Black Mountains, are very good examples of it. They tend to rise, 2 or 3,000 feet above the surrounding topography. In fact, the elevation of those ranges, or the relief of those ranges above the valleys below them, tends to be bigger than the Blue Ridge escarpment is, almost at any point along its length, with a few exceptions. So once you're already up on the Blue Ridge, you've come up the escarpment, you're going to continue to encounter really, really rugged topography once you're up there. Um, that rugged topography talked about impacts weather through the orographic forcing, and it still presents all of the slope hazards we've talked about with landsliding, and particularly debris flowing during a rain event like this. Right? So flowing between these ranges, you're going to have some kind of a river system down there. And in this part of the Blue Ridge, there's evidence that these rivers have cut down into the landscape within fairly recent geologic history. The result of that is a much more rugged landscape. And I'll get rid of that original river there. And we actually are going to need to produce sort of a tighter confined valley here that the river is going to end up flowing down. So we'll draw our newly positioned river in there. And at this point, it's going to have kind of these interesting meander patterns that are going to be a product of it interacting with the bedrock that it's flowing over. And now we'll need to kind of draft in those steep slopes that are going down to our river as it's carved into the landscape. So this kind of gets things started off here in terms of what you're going to see in this landscape. And we're going to have to take this to another level, because all of the little streams that feed down into this river have done exactly the same thing that I've illustrated there with our big river. So we're going to go ahead and zoom in, and this is going to be, I don't know how many of these little hatch marks can you make here in Microsoft Paint. I guess we're about to find out, because it's going to require quite a few of them to fully capture how carved up this landscape actually is. And we'll try to keep this within reason for the interest of time here. But this is a big part of understanding, why this landscape looks exactly like it does, and particularly why some of these areas, like along the Cane and the Toe, experience so much road loss, and now have such a problem just with simply moving around and letting people get together, exchange goods, get medical care, whatever you like, because it is a very rough landscape. And it's one in which, particularly after a big flood like this, foot travel is going to be a pretty challenging option for just about anybody. Right? So as this landscape gets more and more carved up here, really everywhere you go, is going to have a steep slope on it. And we'll have one more good sized tributary that's pretty carved up, coming out this way like this. Okay. So now that we have this framework in place, we can start putting some structures, putting some people in here. Where are your roads going to go? Well, a good place is going to be probably just to follow what little bit of flat space you might get along this river. Going to have to cross the river a lot of times. And maybe once we get up here, we'll try to do a switchback maybe and come up out of that gorge, right? So you're going to have big arteries there kind of along the river, because that's really the best place to put a road like that. And have roads coming up all of these stream valleys. Maybe you got some folks living up here on some of this flatter upland land. Let's see, we'll have another one come up here. Same type of a thing. And if we zoom in even closer yet, the pointer to pick up there, you could have some structures down here along the river as well, because there's going to be, we'll put a bridge over to them right there. So there are a variety of places, that people are going to be able to use in this rough landscape, but it's going to be necessary to interact with that drainage network to get to those. And everywhere they are, they're going to be put there because it's just a better place to live. Now, the problem with this is if you're at the foot of one of these big drainages, you're going to have that debris flow hazard during an event like this. Okay, so that is a real issue, and that proved to be a significant issue at the foot of this higher topography during Helene. Now, the flooding that you're going to get on some of these smaller streams, they're very steep. That's going to take your road out in a lot of places. So now you've got small scale road failures that are cutting off some of these places. And as you start dealing with flooding down the big river itself, that's going to wipe out that larger road in a lot of places because that road is just interacting with so much of the river network. Right. I have to move the window here just a little bit to zoom back out. So what's taking shape here is a real problem because you're going to have a lot of people all over this landscape that are now going to be cut off from one another and the outside world. And that's just going to be because all of these road networks that are using those valleys have been so badly damaged by the flooding. And what's causing this? Well, at the smaller scale, it's that whole orographic thing where you've got the high topography here with a really extreme rainfall coming out of it. That's going to be fixed on all of these high peaks because of the way the weather is moving. And the Nolichucky River system is sort of tailor-made to maximize this effect because it has so much high topography in its basin, right? So sort of a perfect storm geologically, just an intersection of landscape issues, weather issues, river issues. And when you put it all together, you've got a real problem. Right? So we'll hop back to the maps now and take another look at what this looks like in the real world. Okay, so hopefully that gives you a sense of what this landscape looks like or could look like from the ground, or if you're interacting with it. I know that looking at the elevation models here isn't an everyday thing if you're not working in geology, but having that picture in your mind of what the landscape looks like and what challenges it might afford is a big part of trying to understand what happens to it in an event like this and what can happen to it given certain conditions. So we'll spin around here and start making our way back downstream. Right where we are now, this is the confluence of the Cane and the Tow rivers. This must have been a heck of a place during this flood because there would have been an unbelievable volume of water coming together there. That forms the Nolichucky proper, and at this point, it's just about to enter the actual Nolichucky Gorge, and now you're looking down into the Nolichucky Gorge. Fascinating place. Again, one of these places that I keep saying, like if we were talking about it under another circumstance, it'd be great to talk about the power that shaped it over the years and whatever. Unfortunately, in an event like this, when you actually see that happen, it tends to be a pretty different reality. Poplar, North Carolina, be just off on the right edge of the screen there, and if we fade these overlays away, can actually see a little bit of a settlement there. And look at this in terms of how the imagery has changed after the flood. And if we zoom in there, you can already see all of this scouring along the banks. And if we fade that overlay out, there was a lot of road. There's dwellings. People were down there. Bad situation. And you can repeat this all the way up this river system, all the way back to Pensacola and beyond, all the way up to like Minneapolis. Just the extent of flooding and flood damage, even at the headwaters of this river system, is incredible. And when you think about that, that's how bad it was where the river's starting. When you put all that together, that's how you end up with something happening in Irwin at the scale that it did. In the Nolichucky Gorge here itself, it looks different. I mean, the riverbed looks different. The whitewater rapids in the gorge look different now. And as you fade back and forth between the satellite imagery and the Google Earth from before the event, again, you get a sense of the destruction there, right? So zooming out, you can see that once you get out of the gorge there, that's Irwin, right down on the river, flatter buildable land there. It actually did not rain that extremely there with this event because it's on the west side of the mountains. The issue here with the flood is that the river that comes to Irwin is sourcing its water from these incredibly high elevations that are quite a distance away, but they're going to be sending all of that runoff to Irwin, of course, to exceptionally destructive effect. So when you think about this landscape and you think about what happened in areas like Irwin that were actually outside of the catastrophic rainfall, but still had the effects, it reminds you that you have to think big picture when you're thinking about geology and an event like the one that we just dealt with here. And looking out over the land here and seeing all these white elevated areas that again on this map they're going to be something like you're pretty high up in the 4,000 foot range to a maximum, 6,000 plus feet here in the Black Mountains, 6,000 feet up here in the Rhone Mountains. Down here in the French Broad, not talking about this one specifically here. Also, you got some 6,000s here in the Balsams. But an interesting thing to do, kind of as almost like a final thought here, is to draw out where the max rainfall fell with this storm, generally speaking, which is going to be, kind of along the escarpment there, and you can put some hot spots probably over here on those south facing slopes. And there was sort of like almost an extra kind of hot spot predicted in some of these areas where the high topography is located. And if you think about where the Nolichucky is draining with respect to these areas, it's almost like it's basically tailor made to funnel the maximum amount of rainfall from this event into its channel and then send it out here past Irwin out into the Great Valley. So again, geography interacting with the weather system here is ultimately the explanation for why things happened in the way that they did, and just the ability here from this view to see the entire Nolichucky River system, which I will try to draw here with reasonable accuracy from this zoomed out view. It's going to be something like that. Video I did about the Rocky Broad River that flooded Chimney Rock, that drainage area is going to be something kind of like what you see right there. So big size difference. And of course, a big difference in how much water is actually going to be moving down those channels. Hopefully, you found this interesting here. I don't know, I try to do these videos a little bit off the cuff here. Don't have a lot of time at the moment to get them prepped up really nicely, but I don't know. I hope just the ability to see the maps here is helpful in understanding why this happened the way it did. Not something you see every day. Of course, we don't spend a lot of time in the U.S., I guess, looking at geography really in many cases. But once you see how the land is laid out, where the big mountains are, where the weather came from, and how all these rivers fit into all of that, you begin to see that there is a rational explanation for just how much water ended up coming through Irwin there. Going to try to do a couple more videos here down the road again, staying busy, but still at one point I want to talk about sort of the history of floods like this in Western North Carolina, because there's something to be learned from that as well. So hope you found this interesting, and hope you check out the next video.